Welcome! Down Valhalla for the Mad Doctor, Adega Outlaw! Light the fires for Stone Cold Loki! Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to 7 Kinds of Mischief!
I still don't know how you do that all the
time. It's better to do that live than to do it and try and record it.
Yeah, but I'm always impressed. The man, the myth, the voice.
Yes, I did say burn it down. Burn it down, Valhalla, for the Mad Doctor Adega Outlaw.
And for Loki, ringmaster, leader of the armies of Valhalla, and just a darn good guy.
How are you doing tonight, my friend?
Not bad at all. I'm actually quite excited. This is October. And so instead of me switching from, dark things to light things to happy things to this and that, I'm just giving you true life stories about you'll see. It's all appropriate for Halloween, and these are all authentic. So it should be a good month.
It should. A scary month.
I hope so. Well, it's kind of tonight. It is true. It's something I hadn't heard of, and I'm sure there's several of you that have heard this story before, but it will get there. I will bring the good stuff the closer we get towards the end of the month.
He's gonna bring the good stuff, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah. I know we're gonna miss a week. It's gonna be really unfortunate. But I will be traveling to. We're gonna be traveling to Arlington.
You know what that
Thursday.
Means? Best of.
That we're gonna have a best of, and I wonder just what we're gonna get from Adega. Could it be "Go Forth, My Automaton"?
I found the perfect game that matches that too. Steel Rising. You get to play the automaton, except she's good, but still.
Nice. Tell us a little bit about that before we get started.
Yeah, it's just a steampunk. You know what? Let me see. I think I 86 the Avatar. I had it, but it's set in 18th century France, and there was a magician of sorts who figured out how to make automatons animated and massive. You ever play the Dark Souls or the Souls games?
Yeah.
It's the same. It's the same thing, except it's set with a story based on someone who's overthrowing the kingdom by using evil monster robots or automatons, steam-powered stuff, but they're actually powered by human souls as well, and it's fun. I'm having a blast with it.
Heck yeah. There was this. So I remember there is this part in Final Fantasy IV. It was Final Fantasy II in the U.S. One of the first RPGs I ever played. This is what got me into loving JRPGs. And there's this crazy doctor that creates this giant robot enemy that you have to fight. It's about in the middle of the game, and yeah, every time I listen to that, I can't help but think of that.
Wow. It was fun. It was fun. It's one of my better times at acting. I'm not a best actor, but I actually pulled that one off.
Psychodorm 9 with $2 super chat says, wonder if Loki sang for typo negative. Just saying. No. I wish I had. I could do it. Come by, Canucks karaoke.
No one's found it yet, have they?
No, they haven't. A couple of people have seen video, but they have no idea. And I gave hints. I let little hints out.
Yep.
So, but yeah, no one. Yeah, I'll give you a whole Valhalla package if you can figure it out and dump it on my doorstep. So, Eldrick Lord Hasser with a $2 super sticker, and it's a Shiba Inu, Barton Hearts. I love that. I love that sticker. I absolutely love that stickers. Thank you guys so very much for your super chats and your super stickers. You guys keep it burning bright. Thank you so very much. Mr. CCDB, good evening. Says steampunk is great for sci-fi. I choose not to like CP. That is so wrong.
Yep.
Yeah, CP. Screw CP. It's not sci-fi.
They did my friend wrong, Joe Malazzi. Oh,
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
He's not a friend of them. And Psychodorf 9, no, I did not, but I did meet all the band members, and I have several signed albums from them. The only thing about Abney Park is all their songs seem like they just didn't quite complete them. Like there's some voices missing, instrument voices, but I do like their stuff.
So yeah, we're going to be covering a lot of horror and a lot of eerie tales. I'm gonna go back and tell a couple of classics that we've done on the channel in October.
All right.
So
I am going to talk about one that has been talked about various circles. There's some movies about it, but I'm going to actually get into the real history of it. And I'm still learning about it, but for all intents and purposes, when you see the sources, this will seem authentic, even more so than some of our more modern ones. There's going to be pictures that pop up. They are out of sequence. That's my fault, and I didn't want to pester Loki to try and get them in order. But you'll be able to figure it out. This story is about the Bell Witch. Okay. In the early 1800s, John Bell moved his family from North Carolina to the Red River Bottomland in Robertson County, Tennessee. Settled in the Red River community, which later became the present-day Adams, Tennessee. Bell purchased some land and a large house for his family. Over the next several years, he acquired more land, increased his holdings to 328 acres, and cleared a number of fields for planting. He also became an elder of the Red River Baptist Church. John and his wife, Lucy Bell, had 3 more children after moving to Tennessee. The Bells had a very happy and successful early life at the Red River settlement. One day in 1817, John Bell was inspecting his cornfield when he encountered a strange-looking animal sitting in the middle of his corn rows. Shocked by the appearance of the animal, which had the body of a dog and the head of a rabbit, Bell shot several times at it. The animal vanished. This was the first documented manifestation of the entity. Bell thought nothing more of the incident, at least not until after dinner. That evening, the family began hearing beating sounds on the outside walls of their log home. The mysterious sounds continued with increased frequency and force each night. Bell and his sons often hurried outside to catch the culprit, but always returned empty-handed. In the weeks that followed, the Bell children began waking up, frightened, complaining that rats were gnawing at their bedposts. Not long after that, the children began complaining of having their bed covers pulled from them and their pillows being tossed onto the floor by seemingly invisible entities. As time went on, the Bells began hearing faint whispering voices, which, too weak to understand, but sounded like a feeble old woman singing hymns. The encounters escalated, and the Bell's youngest daughter, Betsy Bell, began experiencing brutal encounters with the invisible entity. It would pull her hair, slap her relentlessly, often leaving welts and handprints on her face and body. The disturbances, about which John Bell had vowed his family to secrecy, finally escalated to the point that he shared his family trouble with his closest friend and neighbor, James Johnston. Skeptical at first, Johnston and his wife spent the night at the Bell home. Things began peacefully, but once they retired for the evening, they were subjected to the same terrifying disturbances that the Bells had been experiencing. After their bed covers were yanked off and James was slapped, he sprang out of his bed exclaiming, "In the name of the Lord, who are you and what do you want?" The entity did not respond. The rest of the night was peaceful. The next morning, Mr. Johnson explained to the Bells that the culprit was likely an evil spirit, the kind that the Bible talks about. The entity's voice strengthened over time and became loud and unmistakable. It sang hymns, quoted scriptures, carried on intelligent conversations, and once even quoted, word for word, 2 sermons that were preached at the same time on the same day, 13 miles apart. Word of the supernatural phenomena soon spread outside the settlement, even to Nashville, where the then Major General Andrew Jackson became interested in the so-called Bell Witch. John Bell Jr., along with his brother Drewley Bell and Jesse Bell, had fought under General Jackson in the Battle of New Orleans. A few years later, in 1819, Jackson heard about the disturbances at the Bell home and decided to pay a visit and investigate. As Jackson's entourage, consisting of several men, well-groomed horses, and a large wagon, approached the Bell's property, the wagon jolted to a sudden stop. It had become stuck in a muddy creek bed, and the horses were unable to pull it out. At least, that's what the men thought. After several minutes of cursing and trying to coax the horses into pulling the wagon, Jackson proclaimed, "By the eternal, boys, that must be the Bell Witch." Then suddenly, a disembodied voice told Jackson that they could proceed and that she would see them again later that evening. They were then able to proceed across the property, up the lane, and to the Bell home. That evening, Jackson told of war stories while his entourage set up their tents in John and Lucy Bell's yard. One of the men claimed to be a witch tamer. After several uneventful hours, he pulled out a shiny pistol and proclaimed that his silver bullet would kill any evil spirit that it came into contact with. He went on to say that the reason nothing had happened to them was because whatever had been haunting the Bells was scared of his silver bullet. Immediately, the man screamed and began jerking his body in different directions, complaining that he was being struck with pins and beaten severely. A strong, swift kick to the man's posterior region, there's a joke there, from an invisible foot sent him out the front door. Angry, the entity spoke up and announced that there was yet another fraud in the Jackson party and that she would identify him the following evening. Now terrified, Jackson's men began to leave the Bell farm. Jackson insisted on staying. He wanted to know who of the other men was the fraud. The men eventually went outside to sleep in their tents, while continuously begging Jackson to leave. What happened the next day was not clear, but Jackson and his entourage were spotted in a nearby Springfield early the next morning, going back to Nashville. Some allege that Jackson later proclaimed, "I would rather fight the British at New Orleans than fight the Bell Witch." That's recorded in several places. The disturbances decreased after Betsy and Joshua's engagement. We didn't really get into that. The disturbances decreased after the Betsy and Joshua's engagement ended. Betsy, their youngest daughter, I'm going to explain a little bit. I can't remember if this story explains it completely. She became engaged with a classmate. There's some controversy with that, and we'll get into it in a few minutes. But the entity continued to express disdain for John Bell, relentlessly vowing to kill him. Let me see. Okay, I thought I had missed something, but I hadn't. Bell had been experiencing episodes of twitching in his face and difficulty swallowing for almost a year, and the malady grew worse with time. By the fall of 1820, his declining health had confined him to his house, where the malicious entity continuously removed his shoes when he tried to walk and slapped him in the face when he recovered from his numerous seizures. Her shrill voice was heard all over the farm, cursing and chastising Old Jack Bell, the nickname she had given him. John Bell breathed his last breath on the morning of December 20th, 1820, after slipping to a coma for a few days. Immediately after his death, his family found a vial of strange black liquid in the cupboard. John Jr. sprinkled 2 drops onto the cat's tongue. The cat jumped up in the air, rolled over in midair, and was dead when it hit the floor. The entity then explained, "I gave old Jack a good dose of that last night, which fixed him." John Jr. tossed the mysterious vial into the fireplace. It burst into a bright blue flame and shot up the chimney. John Bell's funeral was one of the largest ever held in the Robertsons County, Tennessee. People attended from miles away, and 3 preachers, 2 Methodists and a Baptist, eulogized him. As the crowd mourners began leaving the graveyard, the Bell Witch entity laughed and sang loud about a bottle of brandy. Her fervent singing didn't stop until the last mourner had left the graveyard. The entity's presence was almost non-existent after John Bell's demise, as though it had performed or fulfilled its purpose. Now I'm going to fill in some backstory here. There was a person who used to live by there called Katie Bell, and everyone, wasn't Kate, I know her first name was Kate, I can't remember her last name. But everyone said she was a witch and she was nuts and eventually had passed away. And they figure this is the witch that had turned into a ghost that was haunting them. Over time, Betsy Bell became interested in Joshua Gardner. This is the one she was engaged to. Here we go with that story. A young man who lived nearby. With the blessings of their parents, they decided to marry. Everyone was happy about their engagement. Almost everyone. The evil, mysterious entity became furious and repeatedly ordered Betsy not to marry Joshua. Betsy and Joshua's former school teacher, Professor Richard Powell, had been noticeably interested in Betsy for some time and had expressed interest in marrying her when she became older. By some account, Powell, who was 11 years Betsy's senior, was a student of the occult, ventriloquism, a mathematician genius, and well-versed in horticultural and geology. He was secretly married to a woman in nearby Nashville, Esther Scott, during the time he lived and taught school at the Red River. Powell politely expressed his disappointment with Betsy's engagement to Joshua and wished her a long and prosperous marriage. There are some rumors that he pretended to be the ghost, but most of them have been debunked. Betsy and Joshua could not go to the river, the fields, or the cave to play without the entity nagging them. The constant pressure was more than Betsy could bear, and on Easter Monday of 1821, she met Joshua at the river and broke off the engagement. In April 1821, shortly after Betsy Bell had broken off the engagement, the entity vanished. The entity visited John Bell's widow, Lucy Bell, and told her that she was leaving, but would return in 7 years. The entity did return in 1828 and as promised. Most of the return visit centered around John Bell Jr., with whom the entity discussed the origins of life, civilization, Christianity, and the need of a major spiritual reawakening. Of particular significance were its predictions of the Civil War and other major events, some of which she missed. The entity bade farewell after 3 weeks, promising to visit John Bell's most direct descendant in 107 years. That would be in 1935. And the closest living direct relative descendant at the time in Nashville was a physician by the name of Charles Bailey Bell, a neurologist, and John Bell Sr.'s great-grandson. It goes on to conclude a little bit about the area, but there are documented reports, not just from Andrew Jackson, but there are news reports and other things where multiple people had heard and had conversations with this Bell witch. It happens to be probably the single best, even though it's ancient for our standards, documented real case of a haunting. And there you go.
Okay, if I can unmute my mic. Thank you. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, Adega. Wow. Dude, ghost stories and throwing your voice. And was it real? Was it something that was staged? Was it a haunting? Was it?
Jun Wong puts in there, he says, copper and calcium chloride burn blue in a fire, but so does arsenic.
You can get copper to burn green.
Yep, you can. When you mix it with calcium chloride, it does burn blue. But arsenic does exactly what happens when they throw it in a fire. It makes a massive blue flame and would kill a cat quickly. So who knows?
Poor cat.
Yeah, I know. All right, all yours, Chief.
All right, so it's a classic tonight. We are going with the classic. I'm gonna stop my little video thing from going. That way I can make sure that everything's working good. So, Journal of a Psychopath, ladies and gentlemen, for RMS Danforth High School. It was my third week at my new high school. I'm used to being the new guy, so it doesn't bother me much. I'm an introvert anyway. I grew up in the foster care system and had never stayed in one place for too long. I wasn't known as a problem child. I just never bonded with any of my foster parents. They could tell, and my lack of attachment always bothered them. They could send me off and hope that their next foster kid would give them the happiness they were looking for. The living conditions were usually substandard anyway. My foster parents need to be needed. So I never took it personally. I never felt like I needed anybody. It was whatever, however it was. I was in my junior year, and in just 2 years, I'd be liberated from the system and on my own. College would be all but free, as they practically begged us foster kids to go to college. Nevertheless, I was 3 weeks into classes at my new school and had already made an enemy, Jake Pearson. In this suburban high school, these idiots were just like the kids at every other school. A bunch of dudes trying way too hard to look cool and tough, to the gaggles of girls who were just trying way too hard to stand out by ironically doing the exact same fucking thing that every other girl was doing. These hallways were filled with drama this, drama that. Look at these $100 shoes daddy bought me. It's so boring. The day I arrived, I knew Jake would be a problem. Jake was somehow the most single, cliche high school jock I'd ever seen, including in the movies. He was tall, built, a ladies' man, and had rich parents. The most standout feature about Jake was his incessant need to act overly tough at all times. I was never sure if he was compensating for a tiny ego or if he just had a really large ego. Maybe the true answer was somewhere in both of these options. Either way, I hated this kid so bad that just the sound of his fucking voice made me want to move to the next foster home. I was minding my own business one fateful morning when some pathetic nerd had the misfortune of lightly bumping into Jake. Commotion stirred as students all around the hallway gathered to laugh at Jake's beratement of the scrawny little nerd. "Did you just push me, Tiny?" he said way too loud, garnering the attention of the other idiots. The poor, terrified, scrawny kid stammered, gargled apologies. I'm sorry. It was an accident. Before he could finish his stutter, Jake smacked the large stack of books and binders out of the kid's hands, scattering books and newspapers everywhere. Laughter erupted from the crowd of idiots. Has this kid ever heard of a backpack? I saw my opportunity, and it was time to set things in motion. "I bet you get off by pushing little kids around, don't you?" I spouted out with a laugh. Silence fell so immediately that it was comical. As Jake turned around, I could see the blood vein popping out of his temple. This kid had some anger problems. I don't think mommy ever told him no. "Who the hell do you think you're talking to, newbie?" "Some idiot," I responded without delay. Jake was really about to lose it now. He pushed me into the locker and put his face so close to my face that I could smell his spearmint gum and nauseating cologne. I just insulted him in front of his peers. Jake's primal instinct dictated that he had to ensure everyone saw him as the alpha male of high school. Sure, Jake was taller. He was bigger, and he was stronger than I was. But what he didn't know is that when it comes to fighting, I'm the ragtag, scrappy little kid with fast hands. Also, I know how to take a hit. When I was 8, my foster home taught me how to be tough in the hard way. Jake might be a brute, but I knew how to fight smart, and I knew how to fight fucking dirty. I placed my left foot slightly behind his right heel and slammed my shoulder into his chest as I swiped his foot out from under him. The thud as he hit the floor brought shock to the growing crowd. To purposefully add insult to injury, I chimed in with some commentary. "Looks like your dad isn't the only one who beats you anymore." The statement may or may not have been true. But either way, the goal was to get in his head. Fighting is as much mental as it is physical. He got up and came bumbling my way, putting all of his weight behind a haymaker that I could have seen coming from 2 blocks away. I ducked as his fist flew over my head and landed right into the locker. It was too easy. His back was now turned to me and his body twisted, providing a perfect angle to go on the offensive. I gave him a knee to his side, aimed precisely to give a blow to his kidney. Body shots should always be aimed at major organs. That's what causes the most pain. I was rewarded with a grunt of pain as he dropped to a knee and double-overed on his side. I could have stopped there, but I hated this kid, and I needed him to hate me. The quick and easy but powerful right hook, I delivered the final blow. His nose made a crunch under my fist, and I fucking loved it. Satisfied, I picked up my backpack and went on my way, leaving Jake lying on the ground with blood all over his face, surrounded by his baffled audience. I went ahead and walked straight to the administrative office, helping myself to a chair. The secretary behind the desk had a nose that pointed upwards, displaying her nostrils to anyone and everyone. She reminded me of a pig. "Can I help you?" Miss Pig asked, with a high-pitched tone and stank of fake kindness. "The principal is going to want to see me," I told her, with my legs crossed and hands behind my head. "Oh, do you have an appointment?" she asked. I don't understand why this lady feels the need to speak with such a high pitch. It reminds me of nails on a chalkboard. No, I stumbled across a bullying incident, and long story short, I broke a guy's nose. The amusing look on her face was somewhere between confused and shocked. "I'll be right back," Miss Pig said slowly as she got out of her chair. She disappeared into the back hallway and came out a couple minutes later being trailed by a tall, trim man wearing a worn gray suit that was almost as old-fashioned as his ridiculous bushy gray mustache. In remarkably good timing, the glorified hall monitor, who was officially called hallway security, came walking in holding the arm of Jake. To my pleasure, Jake was gingerly holding a large wad of blood-soaked paper towels over his nose. There were several drops in his beloved Letterman's jacket. I hoped it stained. Behind Jake and Mr. Hallway Monitor was the stuttering little kid who had nearly become Jake's chew toy. I almost forgot about him. Stutters shot me a grateful look, but he still remained panicked and terrified. He reminded me of a wide-eyed chihuahua who had been beaten too many times. He was pathetic. The remaining process took several hours. First, the principal, Mr. Hallway Monitor, interviewed me while Jake was working on getting his profusely bleeding nose under control. Afterward, they interviewed Stutters, who backed up my story. Lastly, they interviewed Jake, who naturally claimed that I sucker punched him. After that, I was forced to call my foster parent, Dean, and now he sat beside me as the principal explained my suspension. Dean wasn't having any of that, though. Lucky for me, he's a lawyer, not a big-time fancy corporate lawyer. He was a public defender for the city. Still, his skills proved useful. His arrival marked the beginning of a long argument in which Dean laid out the legality of self-defense and ranted about anti-bullying. The school administration refused to show any documentation concerning previous complaints concerning Jake's bullying, which likely meant that it did indeed exist and the school needed to cover up their inaction. After Dean threatened to file a lawsuit and go public, the principal actually backed down. I was surprised. I never had a foster parent go to bat for me like that, ever. Maybe Dean could prove useful after all. Of course, he didn't really do it for me. Dean was nice enough, but I could tell that he was only on board with the foster parent thing to appease his wife, Sarah. I'm assuming that they tried for years to have a child of their own, but for whatever medical reasons, they weren't able to. Why or how they ended up with a teenage foster child was beyond me. Sarah was the single most generous foster parent I've ever had, but she was absolutely pathetic with her need to be loved and needed. I don't share this need, but frankly, my current foster situation is pretty good, and I like this part of the town they live in. It's off toward the end of the suburb part of the city. The woods were right nearby. The woods provided me with plenty of quiet places to visit. For this reason, I would play into Sarah's needs for as long as necessary. It was too easy to turn on the grateful orphan persona and allow Sarah to feel needed. In return, I'll be provided with as cushy of a life as a foster kid could ask for. Dean and I were now alone in the parking lot. As he reached to open his car door, he stopped and looked at me. "Listen, Rich." Oh God, here it comes. The emotional talk about how he understands what I'm going through. Yada, yada, yada. Ugh. "I just wanted to let you know I'm impressed with what you did. Standing up for a kid that was being bullied. Let's just not tell Sarah about this, okay?" "Sounds good. Thanks, Dean." He looked like he was about to give me an awkward hug. But thankfully, he settled with a slightly less awkward fist bump. Apparently, he was touched by my bold display of anti-bullying, saving Stutters from the big oogly boogly meanie mean. Honestly, my actions had nothing to do with defending that spineless little shit. I don't give two shits about him. I did it because I hated that little fucker Jake. And Stutters gave me a golden opportunity that I couldn't waste. The rest of the day was dismal and ordinary. Classes were easy. I didn't almost go to my homework, but managed B's and sometimes A's simply by getting good scores on the tests. My motivation depended on the class. Math was easy but boring. My reading teacher was an absolute moron who loved overanalyzing worthless poetry. But my psychology class, that was actually interesting and useful. At this point, I had already read the entire psych textbook and continued research on my own. It was helping me to understand more about myself. I had been reading about personality disorders, and I saw a lot of myself in the section about psychopathy and antisocial behavior. At this point, I wondered if I myself was a psychopath. It didn't really bother me one bit. It just made a lot of sense. Psychopathy is characterized by many things, including an inability to feel empathy. This is where I felt uncertain. There was one person, only one, who I had ever truly felt empathy for. Addie. Addie was once my foster sister, but we had been separated when I was 8. I'm not sure if I have the inability to feel empathy for another, or if I simply learned not to after losing Addie. I was walking home, only a 25-minute walk. I turned down the back road right next to the woods. Houses were scarce on this road, nice, quiet, out of sight. About 10 minutes into my walk, I realized I was being followed by a maroon Mustang convertible. The car pulled up and out clambered Jake, along with 3 of his minions. A group of idiots who followed Jake like little neglected dogs, hoping to get a compliment and some positive attention. I can fight, sure, but I'm not stupid either. I was outnumbered 4-1. So I turned and ran for the woodline. I'll admit these kids were fast. I quickly realized that I wouldn't be able to outrun them for too long, so I said to hell with it. I'm more about fighting than flight anyway. I ducked behind some thick bush, grabbed a hefty but manageable stick. If I'm going down swinging. The footsteps were arriving quickly, so I swung right at victim number 1 as he came around the corner. The stick connected so hard with his blocky head that it broke in half. Unfortunately, it was useless now, but the damage had been done, and victim number 1 hit the ground, and he hit it hard. I gave victim number 2 a hard front kick straight to the chest. He grunted as the air escaped his lungs, and he landed on his back with his feet in the air. King Leonidas would have been so proud. Ow! Ow! I dodged the third guy, a fat but strong kid who only knew how to bull rush. That's when a hard rock connected with my temple. I was on the ground now, and I didn't recall the fall. I was getting kicked repeatedly. A blow to my gut knocked the wind out of me, but I grabbed his foot and pulled, putting all my weight into his knee. Whoever that knee belonged to shouted in pain. I probably just hyperextended his knee. The rock hit me again, this time in my nose. I was dazed now, but I could see Jake standing over me with a decent-sized stone. All right, let's stop this before it gets too out of hand, someone said. I think it was victim number 2. Shut the hell up, Brian, Jake snapped back. I'm not done. Another 2 kicks hit me hard in the ribs. Okay, seriously, Jake, I think that's enough. Quit being a pussy, dude. Another 2 kicks found their home in my stomach as I struggled to get air into my lungs. Kick him, Brian. Come on, man, he's already almost unconscious. I said kick him, Jake ordered again, looking threatened with the rock still in his hand. I bet you like being his little bitch, don't you, Brian? That sentence flew out of my mouth before I could stop it. I always knew what to say if I wanted to hurt someone, and that statement was the last push Brian needed. His shoe connected with my head, and it connected hard. My vision was now covered with black dots. Through my blurry vision, I saw Jake lean down. You're messing with the wrong person, Rich. You best find yourself a new foster home before I make your life so miserable you want to end it yourself. Not that anybody'd care. He stood up, gave me one last kick, and then ordered his brainless minions to go back to the car. I watched them leave, one kid heavily limping, victim number one just as dazed as I was. At least I did some damage. Despite the pain in my head and my ribs, I laughed. Jake may have won the battle, but I knew that I would win the war. I knew I'd have the last laugh. Jake had no idea what I was capable of. My limits are beyond the sky. I always win. Sometime later, I made it home. As I walked through the door trying to act natural, it was immediately apparent how haggard I must have looked. Sarah gasped and rushed in to guide me to the couch, demanding to know what had happened. Ugh. There was no way to hide it now. I might as well tell her the truth. Dean would understand. Sarah called Dean, who dutifully came straight home to support his distraught wife. What a pussy. Sarah was choking back tears as she explained to Dean how I'd been jumped. She threatened to call the police and take me to the hospital, to which I objected. I did not need the police to get involved in my war with Jake. If the system finds out about this, they might make me move to a new home. I don't want to move again, I told Sarah, playing into her emotional state. I think he's right, Sarah, Dean chimed in. Those boys can feel like they're even now, so there's no need to take any unnecessary risks. You know how the system is. Dean had come in clutch again. This guy was proving more useful every moment. Sarah nodded in reluctant agreement. It was just too easy to get her to change her mind. But you're not going to school tomorrow, she demanded. You're going to stay home so I can take care of you and make sure you're okay. I reminded myself of how I need to play into Sarah's need to be needed. So I agreed. For good measure, I gently touched her hand and told her, thank you. She allowed a tear to escape after that. Something was wrong with this woman. I could see it in her eyes. At some point, she had had a traumatic experience that cut her, and it cut her deep. I woke up late Friday morning, Sarah bringing in fresh breakfast, eggs, bacon, pancakes. My ribs twinged with pain as I sat up and my head pounded. Sarah was on top of that too, though, offering me 800 milligrams of ibuprofen to be down with some orange juice and a cup of fresh coffee. This treatment was another display that I was not used to. Never had anybody brought me breakfast in bed. After assuring her that the breakfast was wonderful, I told her I was going to rest. After she left, I pulled out the computer that I had purchased with the money I stole from my last foster parents. I was pretty good with computers. They were useful and underrated tools that most teens just use to stir drama or look up porn. People are so obvious to how exposed their personal information is. It took me less than 2 hours to know everything about Jake and Brian that I needed to know. I had his address, I had his phone number, and learned the fact that the family was on a trip to their new lake house for the weekend, about a 5-hour drive away. Probably as a parent's attempt to draw attention away from the school suspension. Rich people in the suburbs are all about image. That night, after Sarah and Dean were long asleep, I quietly got ready. The house had a security system that monitored and logged every time a door or window opened or shut. They probably did it because they knew I was moving in. It wasn't a problem, though. I easily detached the device without breaking the magnetic seal. It was perfect. The security system logs would provide me with a good alibi. should things go wrong. I exited the house through the window and stepped off on the pre-planned route that would mostly take me through a wooded area and out of sight. I enjoy the woods at night anyway. It's so quiet and peaceful. It took me about 30 minutes to arrive at my destination. Jake's house was huge and sat on a lot that must have been an acre or more. I searched through the property near the back door, expecting to find a spare key somewhere. They weren't dumb enough to keep the key under the doormat. They didn't hide it very well either. The rock looked convincing at first, but when I looked at it up close, I could tell that it was a fake. I carefully lifted the rock and found a little compartment underneath containing a key. Just like that, I had gained access to his house. Although the house was large and immaculate, it didn't take me long to find the room I was looking for. Jake had a life-size football poster of himself on his door. His room was huge, the size of a small apartment. I carefully searched for anything that would be of use. On his shelf, designated for keepsakes, I found an old but expensive-looking knife. The knife had someone's initials engraved in it, signaling it might be a family heirloom. I picked it up with my gloved hands and pocketed it. Jake didn't seem too worried about his parents snooping through his stuff. His computer wasn't even password protected. Thanks to Jake's carelessness, I now had access to all of his personal information, including social media and his chat messages that were backed up to the cloud. This was the gold mine, where I would get all the information that I needed. I sat down and I went to work. You can learn a lot about someone's life by going through their text messages and photos. I found out that Jake and his friends had a certain spot in the woods where they would meet up to drink and smoke weed. Thanks to the photos being geotagged, I now knew exactly where that spot was. More importantly, I learned that Jake had pestered just about every girl in school for nudes. If they rejected him, he then pressured and insulted the girls. When I came across his conversation with Brian, oh, did I find my lucky break. Jake had tested his luck with a new girl Brian was dating. When she refused his request, Jake called her a whore. After Brian found out, he finally stood up for himself. The messages show that they had quite an argument. They were not currently on speaking terms, and Jake made it clear that he would not speak to Brian and would ruin his popularity. This was perfect. I now had the perfect plan. I saw that Jake and his family would be home Sunday afternoon. Brian's status showed currently active, so I sent him a message through Jake's social media, asking them to meet me at the spot Sunday night at midnight. After Brian replied with one letter, K, I deleted the messages so Jake would not see them on his end. On my way out, I stole a hoodie, some pants, and an extra pair of gym shorts. I made sure to grab stuff from the back of the shelves to ensure their absence would not be noticed. I took one last look around to feel secure that I left no noticeable trace. And after locking the door and carefully putting the key back where I found it, I went back home the same way I came. Saturday and Sunday, I continued to allow Sarah to look after me. It made her feel good, and I needed her to think that I needed her so I could continue living here. Finally, Sunday night arrived. I put on the clothes that I stole from Jake and headed on my way. I waited in the shadows for Brian to arrive. At about 12:05 a.m., I heard the footsteps approaching. "What do you want, Jake?" Brian stated as he entered the small clearing. "We have school tomorrow." Before he could finish, I hit him hard in the face with a rock. Jake's signature move. Brian fell to the ground, putting his hands on his face as if that would somehow dull the pain. I didn't care. I kicked him in his head and his gut over and over and over again. I watched with pleasure as he rolled around in agony, betrayed and incapacitated. Ah, what the hell, dude? I'm not Jake, I told him coldly. Brian squinted up at the sound of my voice, shocked. He stammered a few disconnected words, trying to catch his breath through the pain. I kneeled beside him. What do you want? Brian finally managed to muster between heavy breaths. Revenge. Looking Brian straight in the eye, I plunged Jake's knife straight into Brian's torso, stabbing right into his liver. I was rewarded with an agonizing groan from Brian. And to get rid of Jake. Another stab, this time off to the side, making sure I got his kidney. This really isn't about you. Another stab. You're just on the wrong side, and a convenient means to an end. Drawing in the delectable thrill of the moment, I thrust the knife deeper and listened to Brian's agonizing moans and shortening of breath. I stared into his eyes so I could see the look on his face as he realized he was about to die. And you really, truly shouldn't have kicked me. I gave him another hard stab. This one I placed just under his left pec. The blade slid right between his ribs, piercing his heart. I pulled out the knife as blood spurted out of the wound like a fountain. I sat back and admired my handiwork. Brian's breast gurgled and rasped in the silent woods. I realized then, though, that the attack looked way too clean. Everything was too precise. I needed this to look like a stupid brute had lost his temper. I gave a dozen or so more widely placed stab wounds, ranging in depth, that looked better. In less than a minute, the groans and breathing stopped. Jake. Jake. Brian laid there. His body did at least, covered in blood. I dragged the body and hid it in some thick brush, where I covered him in branches and leaves. I took my time to make sure that it looked sloppy and hasty. I hid the knife about 100 feet away, knowing full well the police would scour the area and find it. I took the hoodie, sweatpants, and shoes and deposited them in a parked garbage bin that was just a mile off the woodline, about a half mile away from the scene. I had worn long layers underneath Jake's clothes and made care never to touch his clothes with my skin. I even wore a swimming cap to make sure my hair didn't get anywhere. The only evidence left that could tie me to the crime was the pair of latex gloves that I'd worn to avoid getting fingerprints on the knife or blood under my fingernails. I made it back home with the same stealth I'd used the previous night. Quietly went into the bathroom where I soaked the latex gloves in bleach, scrubbing until they were spotless. After flushing the toilet to make sure Dean and Sarah would believe I was just taking a bathroom break, I used a little more bleach to vigorously wash my hands and then topped off a bottle with some water so it wouldn't seem that any had been used. Finally, it was bedtime and I was exhausted. Murder's hard work. Seemed like only a couple of minutes later when my alarm went off. I hurried to the bathroom and took one more hard look to make sure the gloves and cleaning supplies were in their proper places. I then took a scorching hot shower, scrubbing every part of my body with rigor, just in case. I then relaxed and used the rest of the time to reflect on my kill. Sarah insisted on taking me to school, seeing as I had been jumped last week. In my reflection, I found it interesting that I felt enjoyment out of the kill. I didn't recall the same satisfaction from my first kill. Maybe that's because that was the day I lost Addie. I was 8 years old and finally understood what my alcoholic foster father was doing when he was going into my sister's room and locked the door. Addie was only 6. One night when he was drunk, I put his revolver in his mouth and pulled the trigger. Police ruled it as a suicide. I'd seen Addie since because we were sent to new homes that day. She was the one and only person I ever remembered feeling love for. School started, the same business as usual. By the second period, this gossip news network was buzzing with news that Brian's parents had reported him missing. By lunch, it was common knowledge. The best part happened just as school was letting out. I could see and hear the commotion from down the main hall. I walked over, peering over the crowd of idiots, all trying to get a good video clip on their flip phones. 3 police were forcing out a handcuffed and panicked Jake. Oh, God. He protested and resisted, but the police overpowered him and forced him into the car. By the 6 o'clock news, it was a headline story. Jake Pearson, local high school athlete, charged with the murder of classmate Brian Jones. I had a hard time holding back my smile, but Dean and Sarah were in the room. I already had Sarah wrapped around my fucking finger, but for good measure, I told her that Jake was the kid that attacked me. I put on my best little scared orphan face during the newscast. That could have been me, Mom. That could have been me who got killed, I told her, forcing myself to sound scared. Her heart melted, and I received instant sympathy as she pulled me into a tearful hug. Dean, being a public defender, was in the know. He also, believing I was scared, offered me some comfort. It'll be very tough to defend this one, he assured me. Jake will be going away for a long time. The prosecutors have everything. The body, the weapon, fingerprints, even motive. It's like someone handed the AG this case on a silver platter. Indeed, I had. It was the next day that Sarah and Dean sat me down and told me that they wanted to push forward with adopting me. I had gained their trust, and more importantly, their sympathy. I'd now be able to live in the cushy home with pushover parents until college. Even then, they'd probably send me money and give me a place to stay in the summer. They were good-natured morons, but useful, good-natured morons. What a success my first month in my new home had been. I locked in my preferred living situation, got rid of the only problem with my new neighborhood, Jake. And the best part is, Jake hung himself in his jail cell before the trial even started. Police said it was a good thing, certain that Jake was their man and the case was closed. I still laugh when I think back to when Jake told me he'd make me want to end myself. Like I told him, I always win. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is Journal of a Psychopath, High School.
That doesn't get old.
No, indeed it does not. So, guys, next week we're going to do part 2, which is college. We won't have part 3 until the 28th. That'll be right before Halloween. So, all 3 parts. There is a part 4 in the works, from my understanding. So, I'm hoping we will get that eventually. But I love this 3-part series by R.M. Staniforth. Absolutely legendary writer. I love his work. So yeah, all the credit goes to him.
On when that's ready.
Yes. Oh yes. So guys, we're out of here. Thank you so much. Thank you, Adega, for being here. Thank you all for hanging out and listening to this. Thank you for coming to 7 Kinds of Mischief. We will be back tomorrow morning with our Lord of the Rings review. We are not going to have a Friday night show tomorrow, so no late show with Mexican Iron Man tomorrow, but we'll be back Monday. So until then, guys, take care, be excellent to each other, always speak friend to enter, and we'll catch you guys next time.
See ya.
These videos are tremendous. Like, comment, and subscribe, and hammer that notification bell.